relationship that hasn't really worked out. He's constantly trying to kill David. He has this anger issue that keeps boiling up and causing problems. And in fact, he's even using his own daughter as a way to try to get David killed. You know, and we see that in the verse or chapter 18, where Saul marries David marries Saul's daughter, Michal. And every time he tries to do something, we might think that David kind of sees it as this guy's trying to help me out, you know. He's offering his daughter to me if I do these things. If you remember when he offered the daughter this time, he had to go get a dowry. Y'all remember that? Mm-hmm. And he gave this astronomical number. Let me see if I can find that real quick. There at the end of chapter 18.
100 or 200?
I think it was 100, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 100. He did 200.
Yeah, and it was all a plan. It was all a plan to get rid of David. Of course, David being anointed and giving his warlike skills that are not normal, I would say, because of the success that he has. David goes and gets 200. Scalps 200 Philistines, if you will, and brings them. And it's not a big deal to him. And so it just further infuriates Saul. And so anyway, we get down there, and it says in verse 29 of chapter 18, and Saul was made even more afraid of David. Thus Saul was David's enemy continually. And it says in 30 that the commanders of the Philistines went out to battle, and it happened as often as they went out that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul. So his name was highly esteemed. And we pick up in 19 verse 1 immediately. Now Saul told Jonathan his son and all his servants to put David to death. See, up until this point, Saul really kind of keeping it low key. You know, these are my plans in my mind. I'm not really telling anybody about it, but I'm going to work them out, and hopefully it works out in the way I want it to. And if you think about that, you know, as evil creeps into our hearts and our minds, sometimes it begins with a thought, right? And hopefully as believers we suppress that. We can't keep them from coming in. They're going to come in there. But we suppress those things with the help of the Holy Spirit, right? But we see Saul here just entertain those thoughts and work out plans with those thoughts and conceive ideas to carry out those thoughts. All the way to the point that what happens whenever we're so entrenched in a sin that it eventually just comes out. Right? Sin always reveals itself. Right? If we mess around with it too long, it'll manifest itself in some way. And we see that here when he just comes out to his whole family and all the servants, he just blurts it out. I want to kill David. It's no longer a secret now. That's what he says here. But Jonathan, Saul's son, greatly delighted in David. And so Jonathan told David, saying, Saul, my father is seeking to put you to death. And therefore, please be on guard in the morning, and stay in a secret place and hide yourself. I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak with my father about you. If I find out anything, then I will tell you. Then Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father, and said to him, Do not let the king sin against his servant David, since he has not sinned against you, and since his deeds have been very beneficial to you. We see a real contrast here between Saul and David, don't we? You see Saul, who's always wanting to kill. He's thinking very selfishly. He's always worried that David's going to take the throne, which he eventually does. I think he has an idea about this anyway. And you see Jonathan acting very godly. There's a big contrast between father and son here. That's always concerned me when I think about my own son. Is there going to be that big a contrast between him and me? I hope not. I don't think there is. But you see that here from just one generation to the next. And you see Jonathan actually acting very wisely. And he doesn't go and he doesn't demand. This was a big thing I thought about when I did this. If you go back and watch the video. In the book of 1 Timothy, it talks about going to someone who you have a problem with. Or someone who may have sinned against you. Or maybe in sin. And it says go to a father, go to an older man as a father. You've heard these verses before?
Yes.
Go to another person as a brother, and the same for women. Go to an older woman as you would your own mother, and you plead with them. The words actually used in there are the same words they use for the Holy Spirit as helping us. So that the Holy Spirit is our helper, right? Helps us to see things clearly, helps us to understand. And that's in the same way, that's what Jonathan's doing here. He's trying to help his father see clearly. He doesn't go and demand. It just says he went and he spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and said to him, in verse 4, we're actually in chapter 19 now, do not let the king sin against his servant David, since he has not sinned against you, and since his deeds have been very beneficial to you. And so he's telling him right off the bat that this is sin. He doesn't beat around the bush. He doesn't use the PC we talked about this morning. He comes right out and tells him this is sin. And he even tells him that what David has done has been a benefit to you. So you're doing well, Saul, because David's been doing well. Your kingdom's doing well because your main general's doing well. That makes sense, right? He's reminding him of those things. And so he goes to him to help him understand that David is doing good things for you. Listen to me, Dad. Listen to what's going on here. In verse 5 it says, for he took his life in his hands and struck the Philistine, and the Lord brought about a great deliverance for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by putting David to death without a cause? So he's just reminding him. And it says in verse 6, Saul listened. Isn't that wonderful? Doesn't that happen all the time when you go to somebody who's in sin and you tell them and they said, yeah, I understand. Is that how it happens?
Not been my experience, no.
No, it doesn't normally happen that way, does it? Has anyone ever had that happen? Where you go to someone and they listen to you and they recognize and they change what they're doing? Well, that's a good thing, isn't it?
Yes.
The Bible says we rejoice
Amen.
because we won our brother or sister back. Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan, and Saul vowed. How good is a man's vow? As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. Remember that. Remember that, because Jonathan does. Jonathan remembers his vow that his father made. Verse 7, then Jonathan called to David, and Jonathan told him all these words, and Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as formerly. And so he's brought back, he's put in the position he was in before. Everything's fine. All right? And look at verse 8. When there was war again, David went out and fought with the Philistines and defeated them with a great slaughter, so that they fled before him. Now there was evil spirit from the Lord on Saul as he was sitting in his house with a spear in his hand, and David was playing his harp with his hand. Saul tried to pin David to the wall with a spear, but he slipped away out of Saul's presence so that he struck the spear into the wall, and David fled and escaped the night. I thought this was interesting here because you have David. David's been doing this for a long time, hasn't he? He brings his harp and he makes the king feel better. He soothes the soul of the king playing his instrument. And David's still doing that. He's this great warrior general, right? But he brings his instrument along to go see the king, and he sits there and plays for him. Now, I tried to imagine this if I was sitting in my house with my father-in-law. Remember, he is his father-in-law, right? He married his daughter. And I'm over there, maybe I'm playing my guitar, and my father-in-law's sitting over there with a 9mm in his lap. It just kind of brings perspective, doesn't it? And I'm sitting there playing my guitar, and I'm thinking, that guy's tried to kill me several times. He's over there holding a 9mm. Oh, well, I'll just keep playing. Do you see something here with David? Who does David trust?
Trust the Lord.
He trusts the Lord, doesn't he? He's not thinking 1 minute about his father-in-law trying to kill him again. He sits there and just trusts the Lord's going to take care of him. Isn't that a great way to live?
Yeah.
Especially in our present situation. We're worried about, do I wear a mask? Do I not wear a mask? Did I wash my hands? Did I do it enough? I mean, you can go on all day long, can't you? But really all God asks us to do is to trust him. Weren't all our days numbered before we ever entered our mother's womb?
Yeah.
If he has the hair on our heads numbered, then it's not a hard deal to know our days either, is it? You know, if my death certificate in heaven says coronavirus, then that wouldn't change no matter what I did,
No matter what.
right?
No matter what.
We should be like David. Be like David here, because David isn't always this way. It's a good example of how we should behave, trusting God. And it says, David fled and escaped that night. Then Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him, in order to put him to death in the morning. I thought that was kind of funny. You know, you're going to put a guy to death, well, let him get a good night's rest. You know, just hang out outside and in the morning kill him. You know, I don't know what that's all about, but that was kind of funny. Maybe that's just my weird sense of humor. But Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, if you do not save your life tonight, tomorrow you'll be put to death. And so his wife enters this scene now, and she seems to have some concern for him. She knows what's going on, and she goes to warn him. In verse 12, so Michal let David down through a window, and he went out and fled and escaped. Michal took the household idol and laid it on the bed, and put a quilt of goat's hair at its head, and covered it with clothes. So think about this for a minute. I don't know how they lowered him down the window. Maybe it was the bed sheets. Maybe there was a rope in the room. I don't know. But she lowers David down the window, hits the ground, he's gone. Right? Then she takes it upon herself to go get the household idol, which, by the way, she brought. This isn't David's family idol. This is hers. She lays it in the bed. She covers it up, puts a little goat's hair. I guess David's hair looked like goat's hair, and puts it on the pillow where it sticks out to make it look like he's there. So it's kind of like a movie. And then, when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, he's sick. And so I guess they came in, they opened the door, he's laying in bed, they shut it, okay, and they went back. And then, 15, then Saul sent messengers to David saying, bring him to me on his bed, that I may put him to death. And when the messengers entered, behold, the household idol was on the bed with the quilt of goat's hair at its head. So Saul said to Michal, why have you deceived me like this, and let my enemy go, so that he has escaped? And Michal said to Saul, he has said to me, let me go, why should I put you to death? And we see that Saul is so enraged by this, he says, just grab David in this bed that he's sick in and bring the whole thing, and I'll kill him there. And of course, the deceit is revealed by his own daughter. And I can see why Saul would be upset. If my daughter lied to me, I'd be upset too. But that's what she did. She lied, and it got found out. But then when she goes on and further lies again, this is all her idea, by the way. Remember, David's been running all night. He didn't know what's going on back at home. She kind of concocts this thing up herself, which is pretty clever, but it works. And this whole time, David has an enormous head start. Right? I mean, all this time he's been going. And in verse 18, now David fled and escaped and came to Samuel at Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he said to Samuel, and he and Samuel went and stayed in Naioth. Now that's a word that means dwellings. So when we see that word from now on, we'll just say dwellings. It's easier to understand. But these are dwellings at Ramah. It was told Saul, saying, behold, David is at the dwellings in Ramah. And then Saul sent messengers to take David, but when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, with Samuel standing and presiding over them, the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. And so he went away. This was about a 30-minute walk or run, I would say, from where they were, from the palace grounds, I guess. This is a place where the priests were at. They were, and prophets, they would have been studying there. They would have been praying there. They would have been doing their business there. And that's where he went to. So he's kind of, if you follow this thinking, he's with his family, Saul, right? And his wife, his daughter. He's with his family. That didn't really work out. He tried to go to Jonathan for help. Jonathan did all he could to help out, but he had to eventually go there. Remember before we talked about him saying goodbye to Jonathan. And now he's running to Samuel. The last place he can think to go to look for help. So that's where he's at now. And Saul finds out about this and sends messengers. And so when they're out there prophesying, and then when they showed up, they began to prophesy as well. So the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. it's interesting here is that no matter what Saul's plan is, no matter what our plan is, God's plan will always prevail. Amen?
Yes. Amen.
No matter what we think we have worked out in our minds, God's plan will always continue forward.
Yes.
And so, even though Saul has bent in his mind to kill David and sends people to do so, God causes his spirit to come upon them and for them to praise. That's what prophesying is here. They're praising God. These guys coming to do this begin to praise God. In verse 21, when it was told Saul, he sent other messengers and they also prophesied. They also praised God. So Saul sent messengers again the third time and they also praised God. Then he himself went to Ramah and came as far as a large well that is at Seku, and he asked and said, "Where are Samuel and David?" And someone said, "Behold, they are at the dwellings in Ramah." He proceeded there to the dwellings at Ramah, and the Spirit of God came upon him also, so that he went along prophesying continually until he came to the dwellings in Ramah. A lot of people would say, well, this is a sign that Saul was saved. What do y'all think about that? That he's praising God.
Like Rusty was talking about this morning, 70% of people say that they believe in God, but when you ask them, just the basic theological questions, they don't believe those.
Yeah.
So I think that, people can, and then we have, false religions that claim to prophesy or to proclaim God, and they don't.
Yeah.
God of their own imagination.
That's right. Galatians 2 talks about wolves in sheep's clothing, right? Paul talks about that in there when they went and they were doing things in secret. Remember that? And
Yeah. Well, look at all the spiritual leaders in the first century when Jesus came on the scene. Mm-hmm. There was Nicodemus and maybe Joseph of Arimathea, maybe.
yeah,
that actually had a relationship with the living God. All the rest of them went through rituals all the time.
yeah, yep. Yeah. I don't think this is any sort of sign that Saul was saved. But this next verse is tremendous. So I'm kind of glad we went back and went over this, since not everybody has seen this. This next verse is enormous. Look at verse 24. He also stripped off his clothes, and he too prophesied before Samuel, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. Therefore they say, is Saul also among the prophets? Who placed Saul in his kingship? God did. Right? Do you remember that? Remember the 3 signs he told Saul? This is how you'll know that you'll be king. Because remember, Saul was not ready to be king. He's not, I'm a nobody. He had to be convinced. And one of the things he did, one of the 3 things that he was going to do, he said, you'll prophesy. Remember that? Mm-hmm. That way you and everyone that hears you will know, hey, God must have his hand on this man. Because this isn't normal. It's like a believer today that's not living for the Lord, basically, doing whatever he wants to do. And then you see them saved, and you see a drastic change in their life. You're like, something has to be of the Lord here because of what's happened in this person's life, right? And that's what happened with Saul. No one would have believed that he could be king, except for that God enabled him with what he needed to be a king. That's what he did. He enabled him to do all these things. He put the robe on him. Right? Remember, because Samuel is there as the mouth of God. Right? He is the prophet of God. And he goes to Saul and he puts the robe on him. He puts the ring on him. He puts the crown on him. And does these 3 miraculous things that shows that he has been made king by God himself. Right? And now we have here, at the end of all this, now it didn't take very long for Saul to forsake God. Remember 7 days? Mm-hmm. 7 days into his kingship. That's when Samuel went to him and said, God has already anointed someone else. It was David. It doesn't say his name there, but we know that. So here we have him being stripped of his clothes. He's basically being derobed, dethroned from who God made him. And this is very public. Remember, when he was made king, it was very public. And now that he's being stripped of all these things, it's very public again. And he lay down naked. Now, nowadays, it may not be that big a deal to be naked for everybody. I mean, some people don't have a problem with that, right? We have a very perverse culture, right? And it's not that big a deal. It should be. To me, it is. Let's just put that out there. I don't necessarily want to be naked in front of everyone. It's embarrassing, right? It's disgraceful. And y'all wouldn't look at me with, you'd probably look at me like Chris is looking at me right now if you saw me naked, right? It's just, it just strips you down of all your dignity, right?
Yeah.
And that's what God does to Saul in front of everyone here. He strips him of all his dignity.
You've never been in the military.
Close. In the fire service.
Yeah.
I can tell you some stories that I won't tell you here. But anyway, that's what he does. He strips them of all these things in front of everyone. It's public. Very public. Very disgraceful. And they're just saying, they said it's Saul among the prophets when he prophesied the first time, but he's not. It's just a saying. That doesn't mean anything. So that wraps up 19. But we still have David on the run here, all right? After all this happens, David then flees, and we're starting in chapter 20, from the dwellings of Ramah, and came and said to Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my iniquity, and what is my sin before your father, that he's seeking my life?" Now remember, Jonathan doesn't know any of this is taking place, right? The last thing Jonathan remembers hearing is Saul vowed, "As the Lord lives, he should not be put to death." That's the last thing Jonathan heard. So in Jonathan's mind, everything is fine. I don't know where Jonathan lives or what's going on, that he doesn't have any clue about all that's taking place. But he thinks everything's still good. And so he goes to Jonathan. And in verse 2, he said to him, "Far from it, you shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing either great or small without disclosing it to me." What do we know right there about the relationship for Jonathan to say that after all that's taken place? They're not talking. Not like Jonathan may have talked in the past with his father, but Jonathan still thinks, "I've got a great relationship with my dad. He tells me everything, whatever's going on," and obviously he hasn't been. "So why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so." Yet David vowed again, saying, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your sight." And he has said, "Do not let Jonathan know this, or he will be grieved. But truly as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is hardly a step between me and death." Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." So David said to Jonathan, I don't want to pass over that verse too fast. "Whatever you say, I will do for you." This just kind of reiterates the relationship that David and Jonathan have. The love. Remember what Jonathan kept saying to David? That he loves him? And this isn't just any kind of love. This is a deep, personal love. Not a sexual love. We talked about that before, what those words really mean. That's not what it meant. Some people have tried to perverse that, make it something that it's not. But that's not what's happening here. But Jonathan has this deep love. A love like you would have, like Christ has for us.
Amen.
Like we should have for our wives, men. When it talks about as Christ loved the church, we also love our wives. That kind of a love that goes beyond understanding. And it's because they were kindred spirits. As soon as Jonathan met David, he goes, "This is a guy like me," right? Isn't that how we are with people we meet? These people are kind of like me. I want to hang out with them. It's easy to talk to them. It's easy to be around them. Now the pastors asked us to go find people it's not easy to be around and witness to them, and I know that's a struggle. I'm human too. But that's a good thing. We need to be that way as well. But man, when you find people that are lockstep with you, they think like you, they know the Lord like you, because that's really what's happened here. That's what Jonathan really, what drew him to David, because David loves the Lord as well. And that's the relationship that they've had all along. And he says here again, whatever you say, I will do for you. So David said to Jonathan, behold, tomorrow is a new moon, beginning of the month. We know what that, right? And I ought to sit down to eat with the king. So I guess at the beginning of the month, the tradition, if I can get that word out, was for all the people to get together. The king, the generals, the court, if you will, and eat together and feast together. It says, but let me go that I may hide myself in the field until the third evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, because it is a yearly sacrifice there for the whole family. If he says it is good, your servant will be safe. But if he is very angry, know that he has decided on evil. What's David doing there? That's why I said a minute ago, be like David here. Because David's not always this way. David, even though we see him having a lot of trust in God, it begins to wane a little bit. He's concocting a story. Now, it may be that his family met in Bethlehem at every time this year. It may be that they wanted him to be there. That may not be a lie. But David's not going there. But that's what he's telling Jonathan to tell his father. That's where he went. And I think that's the same way with us. At times our trust in our Father is pretty strong, isn't it? And then maybe when things get really bad, it's not so strong. So you can see how human David is, just like the rest of us. That sometimes we're up on a high and sometimes we're on a low. Now, I haven't had this many near-death experiences as David, and I'm thankful for that. And maybe I would act differently if I did. But every time you see him in a situation where it's a life or death, you see him begin to kind of try to work on his own power instead of relying on God. And no matter what our circumstances are, we've got to rely on God. And so this is what he asked him to do. Verse 8, therefore deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. But if there is iniquity in me, put me to death yourself. Or why then should you bring me to your father? And so he's being honest now. He's being earnest with his really good friend. If there's something I'm doing wrong, then let me know. If it's that bad, then kill me yourself, if that's what I deserve. That's pretty bold. And it reminds them of the covenant relationship they have. Remember that when they entered into a covenant together? Remember what Jonathan did? Took his robe off and put it on David. Remember what he did?
Yes.
That was symbolic. And it wasn't just a one-time thing. It wasn't a one-time thing. He was recognizing him as the true king in that moment when he did that. And so there was a covenant between them two. And Jonathan said in verse 9, far be it from you, for if I should indeed learn that evil has been decided by my father to come upon you, then would I not tell you about it? Then David said to Jonathan, who will tell me if your father answers you harshly? Jonathan said to David, come and let us go out into the field. So both of them went out into the field. He's trying to explain to David, he says, look, I have your interests in my heart. Your best interests are in my heart. And David just isn't getting it. Right? He says, come on, man, come with me. Let's go into the field and let's talk about this. He's trying to convince him. He's trying to plead with him. I'm here for you. I want to help you. Then Jonathan said to David, the Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow, or the third day, behold, if there is good feeling toward David, shall I not then send to you and make it known to you? If it please my father to do you harm, may the Lord do so to Jonathan and more also. If I do not make it known to you, then and send you away, that you may go in safety. And may the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. Wow, what happened there? Did you see that twist? So he's explaining to him, I'm going to do this for you. And if I didn't, may I die if I don't do this for you. You know, may my life be offered up. But listen to what he says there. And may the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. How has the Lord been with Saul? He enabled him to be king. He enabled him to hold a position like that otherwise he would not be able to hold and lead as he has.
He even gave him a godly son.
Yeah, he did.
Who didn't mind calling his dad onto it? How many of us like to walk up to our dad and say, Dad, you're in sin?
Yeah, no one.
That's a pretty amazing gift he gave him.
And so we see a change here. And this one, verse 14, kind of further illustrates this. It says, if I am still alive, and you will you not show me the loving kindness of the Lord, that I may not die? Where's he going with this? Why would he kill him? It's his good friend, right? Because Jonathan is already looking forward, like he has always been doing, that you will be king. You will be king. But what does a king do in those days when the old king is out? What does he do with his family? He gets rid of them.
Wipe them out.
Yeah, I don't need some guy. I don't need every kid coming through here trying to take the throne back. You get rid of them. And Jonathan sees that. If I'm still alive, then show loving kindness to me.
Yes.
Because I'm showing loving kindness to you. That's what he's telling him. You should not, and then he goes, this is where the covenant gets even deeper. Goes even deeper with it. You should not cut off your loving kindness from my house forever. Not even when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord require it at the hands of David's enemies. And Jonathan made David vow again because of his love for him, because he loved him as he loved his own life. Where do we see this covenant play out? Y'all remember? So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David. You should not cut your loving kindness from my house forever. Do y'all remember where we see this played out? In 2 Samuel? What does David do when he becomes king? And he's sitting in his throne.
Oh, he finds. Is it
Go and
Mephibosheth?
find anyone in Jonathan's family
Yeah.
and bring him to me. And it's that real crazy name.
Mephibosheth.
Mephibosheth. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a tough. We went and did a 5-day club in Georgia one year. I had this little girl. We had this puppet ministry, and it was her job to do Mephibosheth, and she could not say it if her life depended on it. So I'm not being PC, Pastor. So we were in the hood, and so I said, just say my boy Mephib. When you get to that part, say my boy Mephib, and that's what she did. It worked.
Yeah.
And hey, they got it.
Yeah.
It's a tough word. But he asked to go to the house of Jonathan, find anybody that's still there and bring him here. And of course, they go find him, and he's crippled.
Yeah.
Right? He can't even defend himself. He does have a family, apparently. And he brings them, and he sits them at the king's table, and he eats the king's food. And he fulfills that covenant that was made right here. He takes care of them. So he keeps his vow. Verse 18, then Jonathan said to him, tomorrow is a new moon, and you will be missed because your seat will be empty. When you have stayed for 3 days, you shall go down quickly and come to the place where you hid yourself on that eventful day, and you shall remain by the stone Ezel. And all that means is a meeting place that everybody knows about. It's like we're all going to meet at the Whitney Dam, something like that. I will shoot 3 arrows to the side as though I shot at a target. And behold, I will send the lad, saying, go find the arrows. If I specifically say to the lad, behold, the arrows are on the side of you, on this side of you, get them. Then come, for there is safety for you and no harm, and as the Lord lives. But if I say to the youth, behold, the arrows are beyond you, go, for the Lord has sent you away. As for the agreement of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever. So he devises this plan for him to hide out in the field. And he's going to come, like he's shooting arrows at target practice. And if he shoots them past the boy, then things are okay. If he shoots them before the boy, things are not good. He'll see the sign. He'll know either to come out or go. And then he reminds them of the covenant that they made. Don't forget about the covenant. In verse 24, so David hid in the field, and when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food. The king sat on his seat as usual, the seat by the wall. I thought that was funny. I mean, why is that added in there? What's the guy do that's insecure, goes eat in a restaurant? I see women shaking their head and laughing. I want the seat at the wall, my back, where I can see the door. Right? I know I called them insecure, but I don't mind doing that myself. But I think that's interesting they put that in here, because really, it's no coincidence that it's in there, right? What do we know about Saul? He's beginning to lose his mind, right? He doesn't trust anyone. He's becoming more and more selfish.
Paranoia.
That's a great word. It's just paranoid all the time. So I think that's why that's in there. Seat by the wall. Then Jonathan rose up, and Abner sat down by Saul's side. This Abner is another one of Saul's generals. We read that earlier, some chapters back. But David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul did not speak anything that day, for he thought, it is an accident. He's not clean. Surely he is not clean. Well, the ceremonial law was taking place here. If there were certain things they did, if they were with a woman, I'm not going to get into all that. If they had done certain things, go read Leviticus. Mm-hmm. Right? Around the middle of Leviticus, I don't think it's around chapter 12, 13, 14, 15, somewhere in there, it talks about these kinds of things. There would be a time of waiting before you were clean, those sort of things. And that's what he's thinking. He says, well, he's just not prepared to come to eat. So he must not be clean. It came about the next day, this is verse 27, the second day of the new moon, that David's place was empty. So Saul said to Jonathan his son, why has the son of Jesse not come to the meal either yesterday or today? And Jonathan then answered Saul, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem, for he said, please let me go, since our family has sacrificed in the city, and my brother has commanded me to attend. So he's doing what David asked him to do, the lie he asked him to give. And now, if I have found favor in your sight, please let me go, get away, that I might see my brothers. For this reason, he has not come to the king's table. So they're just going along with their plan they had at the beginning. Verse 30, so Saul's anger burned against Jonathan. He said to him, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman. And so Saul gets mad, and he cusses his son. This guy has lost his mind. He's that overcome with emotion. That's what this is. There's no clarity of thought here. This emotion has welled up in him so much that he's cussing his own son now because of David. Do I not know that you are choosing the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? Man, this is really. If you could really cut someone down in the worst way, this is what he's doing here to his own kid. That's what he's doing. And he doesn't even say David. He can't even say David's name. He's saying the son of Jesse. He does that throughout this right here. And he's saying you're bringing shame on your own mother. He's really cutting him down, is what he's doing. For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. See, he's only worried about his line. You see that? His paranoia that he's going to lose his kingship, that it won't descend to his son, is all he can think about. And he's completely forgotten that God has put him in the place that he's in. We don't have presidents of the United States unless God has placed them there.
Yep.
You know that? I know most people in this room probably are glad the president we have right now. But God placed him there.
Amen.
And God can remove him in November if he chooses.
That's right.
I know that gets people worked up, and I'm sorry. But people are in authority because God allows them to be there.
Yes.
And Saul has forgotten that. What's interesting is that, we'll see as this goes through, is that David knows that. Why does David never try to remove Saul from his throne? Because God put him there.
Yes.
And David's just going to wait until it's his turn and let God do that. That's the way we should be about anything. So let's see, we're in the middle of verse 31. Therefore now send and bring him to me, for he must surely die. Oh, this is the first time Jonathan's heard that, right? What did he vow? He vowed to Jonathan himself, he will never be put to death. And what did he just tell Jonathan? He shall surely die. Now Jonathan knows. But Jonathan answered Saul his father and said to him, why should he be put to death? What has he done? Then Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him down. So Jonathan knew that his father had decided to put David to death. He tries to kill his own son. This guy's not a very good warrior, by the way. How many times he's thrown that spear and he never hits anybody? You know?
You know, it reminds me of Herod in the New Testament, Herod the Great.
Yeah.
You know, he slaughtered all those little babies. He was just, they become idiots. They just, they lose all rational thought to the point to where down through the centuries you see a lot of the kings would kill their children. Yeah. You know, except for the one they wanted. It just,
You're right.
and I have to believe that it's much of it is demonic. It's not just idiocy or, you know, paranoia, but there's a demonic element, just like there was here in Saul's situation.
Certainly.
Look at Nebuchadnezzar, what he did. He ate grass like
Right.
cow.
Yeah.
Thought he was a cow.
For a long time, not just a day, right? 7 years. Yeah. Listen to Jonathan's response here. This is tremendous. I want to go back to the idea. Let's keep this idea going of the godliness Jonathan shows in the way he reacts to things, his attitude. Because I think it's great for us to model, faced with these kind of circumstances. So we'll see verse 34. Then Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger and did not eat food on the second day of the new moon, for he was grieved over himself. You see that? Grieved over David because his father had dishonored him. He's not even thinking about the fact that his dad just cussed him out, right? Told him he'd be ashamed to his mother and tried to kill him. This is not going around in Jonathan's mind, is it? His only concern is for his friend David after all that had happened. Talk about being selfless. We see a great what's the word? I can't think of the word. Maybe y'all can help me out. Between the father and the son here, don't we?
A contrast?
A contrast. That's a good word. Contrast. You see Saul being completely selfish, worried only about himself and his line, and you see his son being completely selfless, worried only about his friends who are in trouble, even in the midst of his own trouble. So now it came about in the morning that Jonathan went out into the field for the appointment with David, and a little lad was with him. He said to his lad, "Run, find now the arrows which I am about to shoot." As the lad was running, he shot an arrow past him. When the lad reached the place of the arrow with which Jonathan had shot, Jonathan called after the lad and said, "Is not the arrow beyond you?" Well, that wasn't for the lad, right? It's for David. And Jonathan called out after the lad, "Hurry, be quick, do not stay." And Jonathan's lad picked up the arrow and came to his master. But the lad was not aware of anything. Only Jonathan and David knew about the matter. Then Jonathan gave his weapons to his lad and said to him, "Go bring them to the city." When the lad was gone, David arose from the south side and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times. What's David doing? He's giving honor to the Prince of Israel.
Yep.
That's what he's doing. Even though David knows he's going to be king, Jonathan knows he's going to be king, he is not king. Right? He's giving honor to him. And they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the more. Jonathan said to David, "Go in safety, inasmuch as we have sworn to each other in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord will be between me and you, between my descendants and your descendants forever.'" Then he rose and departed, while Jonathan went into the city. What is it like when, well, I said it. What is it like when someone in your family is leaving, maybe moving away, you may not see them for a long time? It's sad, isn't it?
It's not fun.
How was it dropping Hannah off the other day?
It's not fun.
Yeah.
Had to remind me, didn't you?
Well, because I'm about to be in the same company as you.
Yeah.
I get to do that with my daughter in August. I'm looking forward to that.
I think even more of when, in 1999, when Joanne and I and Joseph, Hannah, and Micah, Joe was 3 years old, Micah was 6 months old, Hannah was 2. We left my mom and dad's that morning.
Yeah.
It was rough for my parents.
So y'all know how that feels, right? There's a great emotion involved in leaving people you love dearly. And that's the scene here. These guys aren't going to see each other again. I think they know that too. And there's just great emotion. Again, nothing sexual at all about this. It's just two guys that love each other, that love the Lord, and they're saying goodbye. And so they're weeping. And, you know, thinking about that scene between these two guys ought to be the way we feel about the loss that's around us. I think that was a great sermon this morning, by the way, Rusty, and it made me think about the people that are around me and me knowing that the next step is hell. For some people, you don't know. I mean, we're not the Lord. We can't tell who's saved, who's not saved, right? It's not for us. But it is for us to give the gospel message and let the results up to God. And if we have that kind of information, we should be weeping desperately for those folks and live a life that honors God, glorifies God in a way that they see the difference and the change in us. Like Jonathan, who lives in the midst of that turmoil in his own home with his own father, still displays the love of Christ, right? Still glorifies God with all that he does. And that's a good example of how we should be in this world today. And think about the lost in that way. Because I know that we wouldn't want anybody to go to hell. I hope we wouldn't. Knowing what it is. And knowing that it's for eternity. So let's take to heart what the pastor has asked us to do and think about those folks. Pray about opportunities. Let me place this out there, and then we'll pray. If you earnestly ask God to give you opportunity with a specific person, guess what's going to happen? Be careful with that prayer. Be careful with that prayer, because God will open a door, and He'll have it ready for you if you're honest about that. So be ready, because that's what will happen. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for allowing us to meet again and begin 1 Samuel again together. I just ask that as we read through these things, we meditate on your word. The applications are many in these verses, Lord, and each can apply differently to our lives. So I pray we would search our hearts. We would see if we're being a godly example like Jonathan, if we're trusting you like David. Those are the things that we desire. Help us to be bold, Lord, in our meetings with our friends and our family, especially those that don't know you. Give us the confidence, the courage that we need, that can only come from you. Lord, you've enabled us with your Holy Spirit to do all these things. Help us to recognize and discern that and be ready to glorify you in these conversations. Be with us this week, Lord. Help us to be these examples as we go out and do the things that you've allowed us to do. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.